September 17th, 1631. Dusk was settling over a gently rolling plain near the small village of Breitenfeld, just northwest of Leipzig. Under the leaden sky of Saxony, two armies were converging, their clash about to tear apart the very fabric of old Europe. One of these armies was the embodiment of a centuries-old, unwieldy war machine, relying on overwhelming numbers and a formidable yet outdated doctrine. These were the Imperial forces, a Catholic giant dominating the continent whose heavy tercios, like living fortresses, seemed invincible. Their flanks bristled with cavalry, and 28 heavy cannons were aimed at the valley. The other heralded a new, brutal era of warfare. Smaller in number, yet lethally effective, it embodied a spirit of innovation and unbridled fury. This was the Swedish army, led by the charismatic King Gustavus Adolphus II. Its soldiers, trained with unprecedented discipline, were ready for maneuver, and their 75 light cannons promised unprecedented firepower. This was more than just a battle for a strategic point on the map of Germany. It was a clash of worlds, where brute force and outdated doctrines confronted iron discipline, devastating firepower, and tactical innovation. More than just victory or defeat was at stake. The very fate of a continent, ravaged by the 30 Years' War, hung in the balance. The air crackled with tension, foreshadowing a coming slaughter. This battle was destined to become the Protestants' first decisive victory, forever altering the perception of military might. Because behind this battle was not just politics or religion. Behind it lay a barbaric slaughter that sparked a fury, uniting foes and permanently altering the balance of power in Europe. But to truly understand how it came to this and why a new art of war was born specifically on this rolling plain near Breitenfeld, we will have to delve deep into the roots of this massive, bloody conflict. Forget any notion of a local skirmish. What happened on the field at Breitenfeld was far more than just another episode in a bloody chronicle. It wasn't merely the story of a single battle, it was a turning point in the 30 Years' War, a conflict that had been consuming Europe for more than a decade, grinding millions of lives to dust and redrawing borders. Breitenfeld forever changed the course of European history. You'll see how tactical innovations, born out of deep desperation and fueled by burning vengeance, can overcome even the most overwhelming forces and, like a sharp blade, reshape the entire map of the continent. This battle tells the story of the unprecedented birth of a new art of war, where every soldier, every cannon, and every maneuver were part of a deadly orchestra, playing on the bones of old dogmas. Here, mobility and firepower were no longer just advantages. They became absolutely decisive factors, forever changing the face of warfare. Imagine this revolutionary paradigm shift, from cumbersome, slow-moving columns whose power was more psychological than physical, to swift, deadly lines capable of unleashing a continuous barrage of fire, from rare, ineffective volleys to a raging storm of lead and grape shot, tearing apart dense enemy formations, from old, rigid strategies to dynamic, adaptive tactics that stunned and annihilated the enemy right before their eyes. This was a lesson in how the genius of one person, fueled by collective fury and the will to survive, can turn the tide of history. This battle demonstrated that even the most powerful empires can be brought down if their opponents are willing to learn, adapt, and fight for their ideals with fierce determination. But to understand how this came to be and why this battle proved so decisive, we need to go back in time, to the origins of the conflict that engulfed all of Europe. The context for this was the fire that engulfed the entire continent. By 1630, Europe had already been engulfed in the 30 Years' War for 12 years. What began in 1618 as a local religious conflict between Catholics and Protestants within the Holy Roman Empire quickly transformed into a colossal struggle for absolute dominance across the continent. Two powerful factions now stood opposed. On one side was the Habsburg bloc, comprised of Spain, Austria, the Catholic princes of Germany, and the backing of the Vatican. Their goal was to vastly expand their influence and to create a unified German state under a Catholic banner. On the other stood the anti-Habsburg coalition, made up of the Protestant princes of Germany, Denmark, Holland, England, and, crucially, France. France saw the Habsburgs as its primary rival and aimed to undermine their power at any cost. Throughout the first decade of the war, Imperial forces, under the command of their brilliant but ruthless generals, such as Albrecht von Wallenstein and Johann Cercles von Tilly, racked up victory after victory, methodically crushing Protestant resistance. It seemed nothing could stop this Catholic steamroller. Yet the conflict was far from over, and its dynamics were about to change dramatically with the emergence of a pivotal figure known as the Lion of the North. Sweden, the northern giant, had long remained aloof from this European conflict, preoccupied with its own exhausting war with Poland for control of the Baltic coast. However, the growing, formidable power of the Habsburgs and their expansion towards the Baltic Sea began to threaten Sweden's vital interests. This existential challenge forced the young, ambitious King Gustavus Adolphus II, dubbed the Lion of the North, to intervene decisively. In July 1630, having secured support from the Tsardom of Muscovy, which provided favorable grain supplies and with financial aid from France, under the Treaty of Bärwalde, France had agreed to pay Sweden $400,000 annually to maintain 36,000 soldiers in Germany. Gustavus Adolphus landed in Pomerania with 23,000 of his battle-hardened soldiers. This marked the beginning of the Swedish period of the 30 Years' War. Bloody catalyst, the massacre of Magdeburg. But while Gustavus Adolphus was cautiously finding his footing on German soil, fate was preparing a terrifying turn. Emperor Ferdinand II, fearing the growing, almost boundless influence of his Generalissimo Wallenstein, who had begun to concentrate too much power, relieved him of his command, appointing in his place the aging but still formidable Johann Cercles von Tilly. Tilly, eager to solidify the empire's gains, besieged the Protestant city of Magdeburg, which, defying the emperor's orders, had declared its loyalty to Sweden. The city had become a symbol of Protestant resistance, and its fall was only a matter of time. On May 20th, 1631, after months of siege, Magdeburg was stormed. What followed became one of the most horrifying and barbaric massacres in the entire 30 Years' War, and perhaps in all of European history. Despite Tilly's orders to restrain his mercenaries, the soldiers, who hadn't been paid in months, unleashed unimaginable fury upon the city. Fire consumed nearly 1,700 of its 1,900 buildings. Of its approximately 25,000 inhabitants, only 449 people survived. Magdeburg was literally wiped off the face of the earth. Boy, this unprecedented massacre, which became known as the Magdeburg Quarter, shook all of Europe to its core. News of the atrocities spread like wildfire, causing absolute outrage and shock among Protestants. The stakes were clear. This was fury weaponized. The consequences were immediate and dramatic. Elector John George I of Saxony, who until this point had desperately clung to a policy of neutrality, could no longer ignore this apocalyptic call. The threat that his own cities might suffer the same fate as Magdeburg became too real and palpable. He was forced to form an alliance with Sweden, providing Gustavus Adolphus with his 18,000 soldiers. These troops, though inexperienced and newly assembled, were filled with fury and a thirst for revenge for Magdeburg. It was at this very moment, when Catholic power seemed unshakable and the Protestant cause was on the brink of collapse, that a new, unpredictable alliance emerged on the political map of Europe. The stakes were incredibly high. For the Habsburgs, it was about ultimate domination. For the Protestants, it was a fight for survival. And for Sweden, it was a chance to become a new great power. But the true strength of this army, now advancing to meet Tilly, lay not only in its numbers or political weight. It resided in a revolutionary military system crafted by a single individual, a system poised to forever change the rules of warfare. This revolutionary system was, in essence, a war machine, giving birth to what would become known as the Swedish miracle. The Swedish army's power against the imperial forces wasn't solely due to its growing numbers. Instead, it lay in a revolutionary, unprecedented military system forged by the genius of Gustav II Adolf. He based this system on the household conscription of free Swedish peasants, blending it with mercenary recruitment. He then transformed these simple farm boys into fiercely disciplined, incredibly effective soldiers through intense training and clearly established recruitment regulations. Foreign observers watched in astonishment as ordinary peasants were forged into seasoned fighters. Sweden was divided into 8 military districts, each of which formed a standing army. This provided a steady stream of well-trained recruits, unlike mercenary armies whose loyalty was unreliable. This army was more than just a collection of soldiers. It was a highly organized, mobile machine. Gustavus Adolphus's infantry was structured with deadly efficiency. It consisted of half pikemen and half musketeers, an ideal combination for both firepower and defense. But the main change was in their formation. Instead of deep, unwieldy columns, the infantry formed into shallower and broader formations, just 6 ranks deep. This significantly increased their firepower by bringing more muskets to bear. The countermarch tactic was drilled to perfection. The first rank of musketeers would fire a volley, then march back through the gaps to reload their weapons, while the second rank did the same. This created a continuous, devastating stream of fire that could crush any frontal assault. Yet another deadly maneuver was the doubling of ranks. The rear ranks could quickly fill the gaps used for the countermarch, delivering a crushing, concentrated volley at a critical moment. Mobile artillery became the eyes and fists of the army. Gustavus Adolphus understood that artillery shouldn't just be a stationary fortress, but an active participant in battle. He refined the cannons, making them lighter and shorter. A true breakthrough was attaching batteries of 4 light 3-pound bronze cannons to each infantry regiment. These guns were incredibly maneuverable, able to move across the battlefield with infantry and cavalry, providing immediate fire support exactly where it was needed most. They could fire both cannonballs and grapeshot, transforming Swedish artillery into a weapon of tactical breakthrough. This created a stark contrast between the old world and a new era. Now, imagine a stark, overwhelming contrast with the Imperial army under Tilly's command. It was a machine stuck in the past. The Imperial forces relied on outdated, cumbersome Spanish Tercios. These were deep, square columns of infantry, sometimes up to 30 ranks deep. These formations were slow, unwieldy, and while visually imposing, they were highly inefficient when it came to using firearms. Only a few front ranks could actually fire their weapons, while the majority of soldiers were simply trapped inside, relying on the sheer mass of the formation for protection. Imperial artillery was exceptionally heavy and completely immobile. Once set up, it remained in position for the entire battle, unable to adapt to changing circumstances. This deprived Tilly of the ability to quickly respond to flanking maneuvers or breakthroughs. The Swedish army was incredibly mobile, like a predator ready to pounce at any moment, while the Imperial Tercios were more like cumbersome, slow-moving tanks. This gave the Swedes an unprecedented tactical advantage in speed, adaptability, and flexibility, allowing them to effectively employ combined fire and maneuver. They could reform their lines, outflank the enemy, concentrate their firepower, and strike where the enemy least expected it. All of this was completely alien to the traditional, outdated imperial doctrine where mass and passive positional defense were key. It was this fundamental difference in military systems, a chasm between the old and the new, that made the upcoming Battle of Breitenfeld not just a clash of armies, but a clash of eras. And now, with the stage set and the players in position, it's time to dive onto the battlefield and feel this new war machine begin its deadly work. And now, we immerse ourselves right into the heart of the impending storm. Imagine this. The morning of September 17th, 1631. You're standing on a gently rolling plain near the village of Breitenfeld, not far from Leipzig. The cool autumn air nips at your cheeks, carrying with it a faint scent of damp earth and unspoken fear. Before you stand 2 colossal armies, arrayed for a deadly confrontation that will decide the fate of millions. On one side, rising like Gothic cathedrals of flesh and steel, are the Imperial Tercios. These deep, square columns of infantry, bristling with thousands of pikes, seem like impenetrable steel fortresses. Their heavy artillery, 28 formidable cannons, has taken positions on the high ground, aimed across the entire valley. You can feel their centuries-old power, their unwavering confidence in an outdated yet time-tested doctrine. On the opposite side of the field, you see the Swedish lines. They appear thinner, less massive, but within their ranks, you sense a pulsating energy, a vibrant readiness for movement. Their 75 light guns, integrated with the infantry regiments, look like toys compared to the Imperial monsters, yet within them lies an incredible deadly effectiveness. The sensory world of this conflict was defined by thunder, blood, and steel. And then, at midday, the sky is suddenly split by a deafening roar of artillery. It's the first volley, then a second and a third. The ground begins to tremble underfoot from the continuous, relentless cannonade, which lasts for 2 hours. You feel the vibrations course through your body, and your ears ring from the hellish din. The Swedish cannons, light and numerous, return fire with incredible, almost inhuman speed, unleashing 3 to 5 shots for every Imperial one. Their shells, like iron hail, tear through the dense ranks of the Imperial Tercios, turning living flesh into a bloody pulp. The air instantly fills with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the bitter, piercing cries of the wounded. Then, through the smoke and flames, you see it. Without any orders, spurred on by the fiery impulse of their commander, Gottfried Pappenheim, 5,000 Imperial cuirassiers, known as the Black Riders, surge forward. Their polished armor gleams under the dull autumn sun, and the ground trembles, not from artillery now, but from thousands of hooves thundering towards death. It's a wild, furious assault, a sight that makes your blood run cold. But the true shock, the absolute horror, comes later. On the left flank, where the inexperienced Saxons stand, something nobody expected happens. Under the pressure of the Imperial cavalry, they flee. In a panic, abandoning their weapons and artillery, they scatter across the field, exposing the Swedish army's left flank. Now, the Swedes face the threat of a deadly flank attack. You feel the icy chill of fear piercing through the crowd. How can you stand firm when your army is breaking apart? Right at this critical, pivotal moment, when defeat seems inevitable, the unbelievable occurs. Imagine an entire army like a giant, living mechanism turning 45 degrees, then a full 90, reforming right in the middle of the battlefield to face a new, deadly threat. It is an incredible sight of unprecedented discipline, astonishing maneuverability, and an absolute will to win. Every soldier, every commander knows their place, every step honed to perfection. This movement, this magnificent, desperate maneuver, will change not only the course of this battle, but the entire history of warfare. Now that you've personally felt the ground tremble and tasted the gunpowder, now that you've stared into the eyes of death and seen the face of victory, the time has come to plunge into the very heart of this carnage. We will trace, step by step, how this battle unfolded and how Gustavus Adolphus's new war machine crushed the old one. The main event we'll explore is the fury of Breitenfeld. The initial contact was an artillery hell. The battle began around noon on September 17th, 1631, with a deafening 2-hour artillery duel. The ground shook and the air vibrated with explosions. The Swedes, with 51 heavy and 24 light cannons against the Imperial Army's 28, dominated from the very first minutes. Their light, maneuverable guns could fire 3 to 5 shots for every Imperial one, tearing apart Tilly's dense, unwieldy Tercios. Each Swedish battery inflicted devastating damage, knocking dozens of soldiers out of the Imperial ranks. Then, without waiting for orders, Gottfried von Pappenheim, commander of the Imperial left flank and known for his reckless bravery, hurled his 5,000 cuirassiers, the Black Riders, into an attack on the Swedish right flank. It was a furious, desperate attack, but the Swedes were ready. Their musketeers, concealed within their cavalry formations, held their fire and then unleashed dense, devastating volleys upon the cuirassiers. Pappenheim's 7 furious charges shattered against the steel walls of Swedish discipline and firepower. Each wave retreated, leaving behind mountains of dead and wounded. Shattering expectations, the Saxons began their flight. On the other flank, Imperial cavalry under Fürstenberg's command crashed into the inexperienced, recently mobilized Saxons. These troops, although filled with rage over Magdeburg, lacked any real combat experience. They could not withstand the assault and, abandoning all their artillery, devolved into a panicked rout, exposing the Swedish army's left flank. Tilly saw this massive gap and instantly recognized his opportunity. His eyes lit up. He ordered his massive tercios to reposition for a flank attack, aiming to bypass the Swedes and pin them against the Loberbach stream. It would be a fatal strike, one that could crush Gustavus Adolphus. To achieve this, Tilly's forces now began the crucial maneuver of turning the army. But Tilly hadn't accounted for the incredible flexibility and speed of the Swedish military machine. General Gustav Horn, commander of the Swedish left flank, reacted instantly and brilliantly. Imagine this incredible moment. An entire army, like a single living organism, pivots 90 degrees, creating a new, powerful defensive line right before the eyes of the stunned enemy. It was a tactical masterpiece showcasing unprecedented discipline and maneuverability. Simultaneously, Gustavus Adolphus, personally leading the reserves and Johann Banner's cavalry, launched a swift, audacious raid into the Imperial rear. This was a blow designed to break Tilly's back. The Swedish cavalry, like a whirlwind, broke through to the heavy Imperial artillery, which, being immobile, was completely defenseless. They captured the guns in a matter of minutes. A psychological breaking point was reached with the onset of friendly fire. And this is where a complete and devastating psychological breaking point was reached. The captured Imperial artillery was immediately turned against its former masters. The Imperial Tercios, who until then had only experienced frontal combat, now found themselves under terrifying crossfire. Swedish artillery tore through their dense ranks from the front, while their own heavy cannons pounded them from the rear. The cumbersome, slow-moving tercios, designed for frontal assaults, were completely unsuited for such a multi-directional, merciless slaughter. The relentless fire from light Swedish artillery and musketeers at close range literally mowed down the Imperial infantry. This triggered total panic and broke the fighting spirit of even the most seasoned soldiers. The feeling of betrayal, the realization that their own weapons were now killing them, was unbearable. The final rout, a catastrophe for Tilly. Disoriented, exhausted, and demoralized, the Imperial forces began to crumble. Under heavy fire and continuous, brutal attacks by the Swedish cavalry, Tilly's Imperial troops completely disintegrated. Their formations dissolved into a chaotic mob. Tilly's attempts to rally the retreating units proved futile. Tilly himself, wounded, barely escaped capture, miraculously breaking free from the bloody cauldron. His proud veteran army was utterly destroyed. This was an absolute rout, a catastrophe that forever changed the face of warfare. The Battle of Breitenfeld was over, but the consequences of this brutal, decisive clash were only just beginning to unfold, shaking the very foundations of Europe and forever redrawing the map of the continent. Now, let's examine the aftermath, a resounding echo of thunder. The Battle of Breitenfeld became an absolute turning point in the 30 Years' War. It wasn't just another episode, but a seismic shift in European history, its echoes reverberating across the continent. It was the birth of a new era in military art. First and foremost, Breitenfeld decisively demonstrated the superiority of the Swedish tactical system over the outdated, cumbersome Imperial tercios. It was a victory of tactics over numbers, of innovation over dogma. The battlefield became a laboratory where Gustavus Adolphus demonstrated the power of linear tactics. The even distribution of troops across the front and formations in 6 ranks, which maximized firepower and maneuverability, became the new standard. Light 3-pounder cannons, attached directly to regiments, proved incredibly effective. They didn't just cover battle lines, but actively maneuvered with infantry and cavalry, concentrating fire where it was needed most. This marked the end of an era of static artillery batteries. Breitenfeld was a triumph of coordination and discipline. The combined actions of musketeers, pikemen, and cavalry, capable of rapid maneuvers and continuous fire, became a deadly formula for success. It was after this battle that a new military art, based on mobility, firepower, and discipline, began its unstoppable spread across Europe. Politically, the battle brought immediate shock and a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The Swedish victory at Breitenfeld sent absolute shockwaves across Europe. Until this point, Protestants had been perceived as mere rebels, destined for suppression. Now, they had transformed into a powerful, invincible force, capable of crushing the Catholic League itself. All of northern Germany fell under Gustavus Adolphus's control. The Swedish king, now firmly in control, chose not to pursue Tilly further. Instead, he marched south through Germany, capturing cities and fortresses. This created a direct threat to the Austrian Habsburg territories. Many imperial princes and cities, inspired by this victory and fearing they would end up on the losing side, immediately joined the Swedish-Saxon alliance. Breitenfeld became a powerful symbol of Lutheran vengeance for the barbaric Magdeburg massacre. It demonstrated that atrocities could not only terrify, but also ignite an incredible destructive fury. The human cost of this conflict was immense, and it also brought about a fundamental transformation of armies. Tilly's imperial army suffered catastrophic losses, with 7,600 killed and 6,000 captured. An additional 12,400 soldiers fled, and 3,000 more were captured during the pursuit. This was a complete and irreversible annihilation. What's more, the 6,000 prisoners were not executed. Instead, they were incorporated into the Swedish army, making it even stronger than before the battle. Gustavus Adolphus's army lost about 3,500 men, with only about 700 of those being Swedes. The fall of Magdeburg became the bloody catalyst, and Breitenfeld was its brutal answer. This victory forever changed the balance of power in Europe, ushering in a new era of warfare and demonstrating that the future belonged to those willing to learn, adapt, and fight, not just with courage, but with unparalleled tactical genius. But what lessons does this epic battle offer us today? What can it tell us about leadership, systems, and the fragility of even the most powerful empires? The big takeaway is the lesson of Breitenfeld. Breitenfeld is not merely the triumph of a single commander, no matter how brilliant Gustavus Adolphus may have been. It is a harsh but timeless lesson on the power of adaptation and innovation in the face of rigidity and outdated dogmas. History does not remember those who cling to the past. It belongs to those who dare to change the rules of the game. This is a story of how the barbaric cruelty, the atrocities committed in Magdeburg, could have only bred despair and surrender. But instead, they ignited an unyielding fury that managed to unite enemies and inspired them to create systems capable of changing the world. The Saxons' thirst for vengeance, combined with the cold, calculated genius of the Swedish king, became a powerful catalyst. Breitenfeld shows that even the most powerful empires, those that seem unshakable, built on centuries of tradition and overwhelming numerical superiority, are utterly fragile when their adversaries are willing to learn, adapt, and fight for their ideals with unprecedented determination and an innovative approach. Breitenfeld's core lesson, thundering through the ages, is that discipline, mobility, and innovation always overcome outdated dogmas and numerical superiority. An act of barbaric slaughter may not be the end, but rather a catalyst for unity and the birth of a new, invincible force, forever changing the course of history. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human ingenuity, fueled by desperation and righteous anger, is capable of turning the world upside down. And this echo of Breitenfeld still resonates today, warning against hubris and calling for constant development.